morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTubers. This is Jerry Diamond with How to Get Out of Babylon. And we're reading Toy Campaign, book 2 in the series, the Spirit Flyer series. Okay, about magic bicycles. Magic is good, the force of good, God, the three kings. Tragic is the bad powers, the enemy, treason. So treason brought about tragic, and magic versus tragic. So I wrote my son, my oldest son, and asked him if he remembered it. And he goes, "Oh yeah, I remember him very well." So hopefully he got something from him. I'm not sure if he did or not. It would be nice if he did. I don't know how old he was when we were reading them. I can't remember if we started in Denver or Kansas or Missouri. I think it was in Denver, probably. Yeah, yeah, because I was going through. Because I was going through the whole dock thing, the freight handling situation with being on the board, which is going to come into play in the only game in town, the next book. Okay, we read chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. Now I realize my feet are a little bit cold, so oh well. I'll deal with it. Maybe I'll try to cover it up. There we go. Better. Okay, Susan's incredible tale. Later that afternoon, Susan and John argued all the way to the sheriff's office about uh, whether to tell about their adventure at the dump to their dad, the sheriff. Both they were so wrapped up in their fight that they didn't notice the boys from the Cobra Club following them from a distance. The sheriff's office in Centerville was located on the corner of Maple and 10th Street, a few blocks west from the town square. For years, the entire police department had been in the big courthouse building, but when a new factory had opened up on the edge of town 30 years before the town had grown, the town council had moved the sheriff's office from the courthouse office into a new, more modern building with more room and better facilities, like jail cells. Susan knocked down a kickstand and parked her Spirit Flyer by the front steps of the sheriff's office. John practically dropped his bike down on the sidewalk and scrambled up the steps past her. He stopped in front of the door, blocking her way. "Just wait and think," John said. "I've already made up my mind," Susan snapped back. "I think we should tell Dad, and I'm going to do it. Now move out of my way." "Will you just wait a second?" John asked, holding his hands up like a crossing guard at school. "Just because you read a few pages of an old book about Spirit Flyers doesn't mean you're suddenly an expert. After all, I've had my Spirit Flyer a lot longer than you. Don't forget that I was the one who caught those thieves who..." "You've been saying that all afternoon," Susan sneered impatiently, "but you don't really know what's going on any more than I do. I think you're just scared. In fact, I think there's something happened to you when you disappeared, and you don't want us to know for some reason." "What have I got to hide?" Don said in his most innocent voice. "I wonder," Susan snapped. As they worked cutting grass that day, she had decided that she would tell her father what had happened. John was completely against the idea. First, he begged her not to tell. Then he almost threatened her if she did tell. She was convinced he was either hiding something or just blind to the strange way he was behaving. But besides being upset, deep down, she was also somewhat worried about her cousin. "If you tell him what happened, we'll probably get in trouble, and he won't want us to investigate anymore," John whined. "Something important may be about to happen. I need to be free to get around." "What do you mean?" Susan asked. "What do you think is going to happen?" "I'm not really at liberty to say," John said with a note of superiority in his voice. "Yeah, right. These things are complicated, and since you've only had your Spirit Flyer for a short time, unlike me, you probably wouldn't understand anyway. When you've proven yourself worthy the way I did when I brought back all those..." "Out of my way, you pompous windbag," Susan said, and pushed him off balance. She opened the door and darted inside before John could stop her. "Wait," John yelled as he rushed out after her. "Wait for what?" George the deputy asked. He rolled his wheelchair over to the long front counter of the sheriff's office and stared at the two children. Susan ignored the deputy and walked past the front counter with John hot on her heels. She opened the door to her father's office without knocking and went in. John slammed the door shut. Sheriff Kramer hardly had a chance to say hello. Susan quickly blurted out the whole story about the black window behind the toy store and at the dump. And when she was finished with that, she complained about John's behavior in general, and then in a list of specific details. John tried to interrupt a few times, but Susan just kept talking. Sheriff Kramer's face grew more and more serious as he listened. Susan sighed when she finally finished. Then she looked at John and smiled with great satisfaction, as if daring him to speak. Sheriff Kramer smiled with great Sheriff Kramer looked at both children. His face looked tired. He had been working longer hours than usual since one of his deputies was on vacation, and besides that, Mrs. Kramer had been sick in bed the last week. What's your side of this somewhat incredible tale? Sheriff Kramer asked John. Why are you calling it a tale as if it's a story or something? Susan blurted out defensively. You act like I made everything up. Incredible tale were his actual words, John said. He smiled sweetly at Susan and stuck his tongue out when Sheriff Kramer wasn't looking. Now he's sticking out his tongue, Susan complained. How juvenile. And you think you're so experienced in everything. John quickly sucked his tongue inside before his uncle could see. While Susan was talking, he smiled to himself. A brilliant idea had come to the boy, as if out of nowhere. Though he knew such a plan was risky, he decided it was worth it under the circumstances. Once I get the toys, then I can make it up to her, the boy thought to himself. Susan is imagining things, Uncle Bill, John blurted out. I think she got heat stroke cutting the grass with me today. I tried to tell her to calm down, but she wouldn't. We were at the toy store and dumped this morning, but we were just looking around. Susan dropped her jaw in surprise. She knew John had not been his usual self lately, but she had never known him to lie. She stared at her cousin in surprise, utterly speechless, but only for a moment. Why, you little... Hold it right there, Sheriff Kramer said firmly. The best way I know to examine a story is to examine the evidence. Let's just swing by the toy store and dump on our way home to supper. On our way home to supper, right? But we told you the black window thing is in the trash can, and the trash can was gone by the time we got back, Susan protested. You said there's one out the dump, though, John said. What do you mean, I said, as if you didn't see it, too, Susan accused. You're trying to make me look like I made the whole thing up. You know what happened. I can't believe it. Let's just go take a look, Sheriff Kramer replied with a tired voice. He stood up and moved toward the door. Susan protested all the way to her father's police car. John winked at George on their way out the door. Then he smiled with satisfaction at Susan, which only made her rage all the more. Sheriff Kramer stopped the car in the alley behind the toy store. He stepped up and looked in the big trash can. Susan scrambled up to look also. The trash bin was empty. Not even a scrap of paper was inside. This doesn't prove it wasn't here this morning, Susan said. Tell him, John. Tell him what really happened. I like your version better, John said. I think it's more entertaining than television, if you ask me. Susan yelped and went at John with both fists flying. Only the strong arms of her father caught the blows before they ever landed. Susan, he snapped and shook her. Susan struggled, then stopped. For a moment she was ready to burst into tears. I won't give him the satisfaction, she thought to herself as she glared at John. Without a word, she crawled back into the back seat of the police car and slammed the door. She sulked all the way to the dump while John talked to her father about baseball teams, something Susan had no interest in whatsoever. He's just avoiding the subject, Susan thought, but he'll have some explaining to do once we get to the dump. Sheriff Kramer dove slowly into the dumping area. Over there, Susan instructed. She looked triumphantly at John. There's the pit where we were in earlier this morning. Sheriff Kramer rode over to the pit. Susan opened the door before the car stopped. A crow swooped down, gliding over the dump, but none of the Kramers noticed. Susan ran to the long pit. John held back, a certain nervous expression on his face. It's right in this hole, Susan said as she ran up to the edge. But the hole was empty. Susan made her hands into fists and stomped her foot. Sheriff Kramer and John walked over. I don't see anything, Sheriff Kramer said. Neither do I, John said, with a big smile breaking out across his face. I'm telling you it was there, Susan said. Just because it's gone now doesn't mean it wasn't there. Sheriff Kramer nodded. He looked down at the ground. I don't understand, she said. Well, you weren't wearing your glasses today like you should have been, John said condescendingly. So who knows what a half-blind person like you could have been. That's enough, Sheriff Kramer said when he saw Susan going for John. Susan clenched her fist and stopped, but tears quickly filled her eyes. She turned her back on them so John wouldn't see her cry. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Sheriff Kramer looked around the dump. The old crow had landed on top of a mound of trash and was perched on an old chair, staring at them. Let's go home and eat, the sheriff said. He put his arm around Susan. And I want you two to quit fighting. I've never seen you both act so mean to one another. She's just upset over some boy or something, John said. I am not, Susan said shrilly. You are the biggest liar that... Then she went silent, knowing that she would get in more trouble if she said what she felt. Her father had strict rules about name-calling, and he forced those rules to the letter. Susan had rarely gotten in trouble as often as John did, but today she felt as if the tables were turned. I think you need to apologize to John right now, her father said sternly. Susan looked down, avoiding the stare. She waited and waited. I'm sorry I called you a name, she mumbled, but what I said about those black window things is true, I'm telling you. Why would I make something like that? Why do I make up something like that? That's what I would like to know, John said. Normally you're so serious and sensible. You should go on TV and... John, you keep quiet, Sheriff Kramer said. Let's just cool off and go home. No one spoke on the way back to town. Susan and John got off at the sheriff's office to get their bikes. Sheriff Kramer drove on. Susan groaned when she saw her bike. Both of the big balloon tires were squashed flat. It figures, she said to herself. She jerked the old bike kicked viciously at the kickstand, and began pushing the Spirit Flyer home. Seething inside as she went, she had already decided in the car that she was never going to speak to John again for the rest of her whole life. The tires on John's Spirit Flyer were flat too, but he hardly seemed to notice. He pushed his bike after Susan, but kept his distance. "What's wrong with you and Susan? What's wrong with Susan and John?" Catherine asked. She was 5 years old and the youngest in the Kramer family. Everyone was home getting ready for supper. "They had a fight," Lois said cheerfully, as she set out the silverware for the table. Lois was 7 and very precise. She made sure the forks and knives and spoons were in the exact right places. Susan called John a liar and got in trouble. "She's grouchy," Catherine said in her small voice. She skipped into the kitchen to get the napkins and put them into the napkin rings. That was her job. Susan was stirring a pan full of spaghetti sauce on the stove. Susan cooked to eat that evening since her mother was sick. Her mother didn't even come to the table. Mrs. Kramer had been sick on and off all week, but none of the children knew what kind of sickness it was. Pregnant? I don't know. She didn't seem to have a cold or anything contagious, and she wasn't taking any medicine even. The children were puzzled by the whole thing. Susan was more than ready for her mother to get well. As the oldest child, Susan always had more chores to do around the house if her mother was sick. She didn't think it was fair. John didn't have to help as much, she thought, which made Susan feel even more bitter about the day's events. She would have refused John's help, even if he had offered, since she was determined not to speak to him. Life was just unfair, no question about it, and to make things worse, she burned herself with the bubbling spaghetti sauce spattered onto her hand. Susan was the last to sit down for supper. The table seemed out of balance without her mother in her usual place. Her father talked about a new company that was coming to Centerville to use the old factory on the outside of town. The factory had been closed and empty for several years, but Susan didn't care about such news. She asked to be excused after she ate a few hurried bites. She stared hard at John before she left, then went to her room. She pulled the Book of Kings off of her shelf and opened it. She reluctantly put on her glasses. Soon she was turning the old worn pages with increasing speed. She'd already read some of the pages before, but she felt like she needed something to explain the odd events of the day. Susan was convinced that John's obnoxious behavior was about the strange black widow had something to do with the workings of the deeper world. The Book of the Kings told stories full of magic and wonder from beginning to end, yet it was also a book filled with many sorrows, as it told of the lives lost to treason's deadly domain. Even places like the small town of Centerville were under the tragic shadow of treason and his band of rebels. Susan had read enough of the book to know that even ordinary people were somehow in the middle of this continuing deeper battle. And deep inside, she wondered if John Kramer could have been affected in some way when he disappeared. John had his faults, but to lie the way he had seemed bizarre to Susan. Before he had left, Grandfather Kramer had spoken of the tragic powers of the deeper chains. Susan didn't know much about these mysterious chains, except that they were dangerous. She wondered if John's strange behavior was connected to the chain somehow, as if he were under a spell, like he keeps going like this through his neck. Feeling it? Yeah. The girl didn't know that there were certain deep secrets that could only be discovered. You had to do more than just read about them in the book. But without the book, nothing in the world made much sense. Susan believed that if John would only read the Book of the Kings, he might find the doorway to the help he needed. But John seemed to be preoccupied with the toy store and some terrible secret inside. Susan put the big book on a shelf and turned out the light. She opened her window to look out at the night stars, but the sky was dark with clouds. The world seemed so lonely and unfair to the girl. If there was a battle going on in the shadows, Susan felt that the darkness must be winning. She fell into a restless sleep of bad dreams that she would forget before waking. Kind of how I feel. Powers of darkness are winning. Everybody around me is controlled by the chains around their neck. The snakes biting into them skin. Arms and legs and back and neck. I don't know. Hey, anybody on? A couple people maybe. Let me guess. Captain Zaboom, Zapum Kaboom, and Gadian. Yeah. Okay. How you guys? How you doing? Hey, so I was going to go to an expo, preparedness expo, which is tomorrow and Friday, Thursday and Friday at Roby, Missouri. But I don't think I'm going to go. I was going to bring some product, Nitro 9, which is a phenomenal subsurface metallic lubricant, metal penetrating lubricant. When the guy first started producing it, it was only sold to, you could only make enough to sell it to refineries, because when they were down, they lost millions of dollars every day. They were shut down. So then he was able to increase production to the point where he could sell it to NASCAR racers and stuff. And they would, instead of tearing an engine down after every race, they'd start tearing their engines down about every 10 races. Anyway, I've talked about it before, but I was going to take that product to the expo and sell it, but it didn't get shipped, so I'm not going to do that. And I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to go at all because I don't have a ride. I got two guys here with cars, but they're both preoccupied with other things. Timothy's got other things going on in his life, and Rock's got to go look for land, so I'm not going to lean on either one of them. So I guess I'm not going. Kind of sucks, you know. It'd be nice to be able to have a car to go, but I wish I had a vehicle. I don't have one. Oh well, so sad, too bad, so sad, all that good stuff. So I don't know. I need to find a vehicle to drive for my vacation next month, so I got to do something about that. See if I can rent a car from somebody I know, Rock or Bill, I don't know, whichever. Because renting a car is like $100 a day, and it's kind of out of our reach. So I don't think I'm gonna be able to do that. Don't think I would want to do that. So owning a car would really be nice right now. I was going to have a car, but it didn't get to me, so it was taken back to Denver and sold. Subaru Outback would have been nice. Anything would be nice. Anything that goes around on, is in decent shape. So anyway, anybody out there might possibly listen to this. I'll send this link to some people. Say, please listen till the end. So everybody knows what car I can rent. The 14th through the 19th of June. I need a car for about 5 days. Gonna have a 2-bedroom house on lake, Stockton Lake, and Stockton Lake Escape is the name of it. So you can look it up and see what you think. It's not a really nice location. Real right by the lake. It's about, I don't know, walking distance from the lake. And nice beach area there, rocky shore and whatnot, fireplace and whatnot. So looking forward to doing some videos, a lot of outdoor and off-grid cooking with the different things I've talked about before. So some good organic off-grid cooking. So anyway, that's my story for the day. So sorry. I'll just get off here. All right. Well, God bless everybody. Mike, you don't have a car yet? No way. Are you kidding me? Grandpa Zepton don't have a car? How do you get to work? Do you work? I mean, I ask these questions, the answer. That's okay, but whatever. You say you got nearby to get it. How often do you get to see him? All kinds of questions like that. So, are you working? Or how old are you? I know a lot more about Gadianton because he's local. I've known him for quite a while, quite a few years, but I ask him too many questions. Yeah. Hope your kids are mid-60s. That's not old. You're a young fart. I'm 67. Anyway, all right. Good night. See ya, guys.